but
Really?
you can definitely see the hand of Chris.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting for me because if you compare that to, say, Domaine Drouin in Burgundy and in Washington State, couldn't be more different stylistically as wines go. It was a real, and it's always been the case. I think of Marc Chapoutier's work in Heathcote in Victoria compared to Rhone, totally different wines. There might be, in fact, there's a whisper of style that attributes to both hemispheres, but not in the way that Chris's does, for sure.
I think also Chris, I know when he was finding those projects, hunting for those projects, being, I mean, I know he's a Kiwi, but effectively being a Baross and knowing what the whole setup is there, he gravitated to projects in regions that echoed what he knew.
Oh, okay. So the terroir was to a certain degree.
And listen, I'd love to see what Chris would do with some Galician project making Alvarenga or something like that. But definitely you could see Chris gravitated to regions and things where he thought, it echoed what he knows. And it's a lot of my philosophy on winemaking, although the style of wines I work with and have produced are quite different to what Chris might.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking that Syrah that the guys are going to taste tonight is all your style, or certainly not a Ringland Syrah by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the winning, actually we don't have the Syrah tonight. We've got it on the side. That's what it is. There's a beautiful texture and a crunch to the Syrah that you have, which is really inspiring. It's almost Grenache-like, the texture. I really love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Enormously. And it's certainly not a style that one would mistake for Australia or New Zealand at all. Production point of view. In fact, there's maybe a greater risk of attributing it to somewhere in Spain than anywhere else that I could think of.
Absolutely.
Alistair, please meet my partner Lou in Singapore, who's in the top left-hand corner. He's the bloke who does all the buying. I just make the noise. So I don't know how we buy direct from you. I don't even know.
Yeah, we do now. Well, the last shipment we did, it was the first one we did direct.
All right.
Alistair, before then we were buying it through your UK agents, actually.
Okay, cool.
But the volume started to tick up on our site for South African wine generally, and for your wine more specifically. So we did a direct importation last time, which I think was about 3 months ago. I think.
Yeah, that's about right.
It was before your arrival, just before your arrival, actually.
It was just, it was about as I was getting here. I remember we were talking about it.
The really cool thing, Lou, I was just saying to Alistair was I'm going to pin you as well, so, Lou, so you can, everyone can watch you picking your nose through the tasting, put some pressure on you. The really cool thing is the migration of influence towards the premium part of the Morgenzon stable. People are really interested in Chenin. I would say for the first time in my experience outside of South Africa, I have people seeking Chenin Blanc and South African Chenin Blanc, which is a really cool thing. And also that.
Actually, on that point, actually, Alistair, I remember the last discussion I had with your predecessor. He was setting aside a small amount of your super bomb diggity premium Chenin. I bought the reserve. I know we've got the reserve. We're looking at the reserve tonight. Yeah. And then he had another super reserve or something.
No, absolutely. It's a specific block on the property. It's a 50, or it's turning 50. It'll be its 50th vintage next year. It was planted in 72. And it makes a pretty unique expression of Chenin. It's definitely, it's the Morgenzon. It's the lower section where the reserve parcel is planted, and it's a different clone to the rest of the vineyard. and no one knows what clone it is. It's an unknown clone that we've actually now taken to our local vine research place, Vititech, and they've multiplied it, and we're about to do a young vineyard planting of this clone, and it's referred to as now, because we call the wine the Divas, and so it's going to be called the Divas clone going forward. And it's a very unique wine, and it's more Burgundian in its texture. It's a less showy wine than the Reserve, but the texture and the length and the linearity is just extraordinary. It's a big wine, but I put my hand up.
I put my hand up for some, because my understanding was there's only about 100 cases or something like that of it. So I don't know whether that order got lost in the shuffle, but if you could check on that for me, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I'll make a note of it. I'm most probably going to be releasing the new vintage of that towards the end of the year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we're tweaking the packaging slightly. We're going to put a new capsule on it. And when that's finalized with Wendy, we'll finish it off. It's bottled. Obviously, it's been bottled for a while.
Still in cork, Alistair, or are you going for something synthetic? Cork. Okay.
No, it's cork. It's natural cork. We're using as close to as what we can do is a perfect cork. Goes through the whole special treatment at Amarim. Each cork is tested. The whole 9 yards. But at the moment, we still sticking with cork. I was one of the first South Africans to use screw cap in South Africa, but at the premium end, we'd rather find the better quality cork than to go somewhere else.
I think the tech's catching up to the cork problem, and also a lot of feedback from the European producers is that there's so much Stelden being used in the New World that there's more cork to go around. See, it's a better quality product is actually being offered these days. But anyway, we're on 7 o'clock, so let's kick it off. Alistair, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you zoom in to taste our latest array of De Morgenzon wines. It's an interesting time because we've been marketing De Morgenzon, the blue and red label, and the white, the DMZ, for at least 3 vintages, probably more. But I was just saying earlier before we kicked off how great it's been to see a real evolution and change in the level of interest in South African wines in general in Singapore, and Chenin Blanc and De Morgenzon in particular. We're seeing very serious recognition to the quality end of brand South Africa. And to be fair, the last few vintages of Chenin Blanc and Chardonnay from you guys have been stunning. And I'm really jazzed to be able to taste them all with you tonight. So with that, yes, I just wanted to mention for the Australians amongst us on the tasting panel, Alistair has spent quite a lot of time working with Chris Ringland, both in Australia, America, and Spain. And so we have an almost Australian connection with Alistair tonight. And it's great to be able to reminisce earlier about your relationship with Chris. So with that, I'll hand over to you and we'll take it from there. Alistair, if you've got anything you want to show by way of PowerPoint, we can do that. I've authorized you to share screen if you want to, but otherwise, let's maybe taste the first white on its own, and then the 2 Chenins side by side would be pretty cool after that. So, John.
Well, absolutely. So, Robert Lou, thanks for having me. It's for me as a winemaker and a wine person, I joke that I'm a wine professional by day and a wine geek by night. So it's pretty much wine all day, and I'll yabber along all day about wines, but to share these great wines with you is a real privilege. I'm super passionate about wine. I'm super passionate about South Africa and the trajectory that South African wine is taking. I think finally we're starting to catch up. I think we've got our viticulture and winemaking down. Up until the mid-90s, we were making wine literally in isolation. Yeah, there was no international experience to be had. There were very little international wines. And so when initially we got it back into the world of wine, we were mimicking. We just sort of copied. We went to Australia and copied what they did. And it wasn't actually true to our terroir. But now with more experience, more winemakers traveling, myself included, and the whole arsenal of South African winemakers, we're starting to get a real understanding of our terroir and our subunits, etc. And you're seeing it in the wines. And owing to the fact that I've managed to make wine pretty much in every corner of the globe, I can say it with some context. I think there's no more exciting place to be making wine at the moment than South Africa. The quality and the value proposition is just as good as anywhere in the world. I don't do PowerPoint presentations, but I do have a couple that will just give you a quick background about the Morgenzon, the owners, who I think are quite interesting people, and we'll give you a couple of slides just to see a bit of the beauty that is the area surrounding us, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
I've got to just share my screen so long. See if I can get this working. As you must probably figured out, I'm not the most technologically advanced of
Looking
characters.
good. No, looking good.
No, I've got a slideshow. Start the slideshow.
Yeah.
Press play. Yes.
It's a long time since I've heard the word yes, like. That reminds me of her. If you want to just click the top left hand. Oh, you got it. Cool.
Got it.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, I didn't get it. Clarissa, our marketing assistant, came and subtly from the side pointed at where I should be aiming. I am, at the end of the day, I add yeast to grape juice for a living.
Yeah, and it's really, don't worry, because during COVID, I think definitely, let me say, the most challenging of tastings that we've ever done was for one of the Sadie family out of Swartland. And I swear, they must have had somebody cycling outside the cellar door to keep the bandwidth going all the way through the tasting. It was a nightmare. So when you got on today and said, oh, I'm just worried about the video, I thought, oh, geez, that's just from your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah.
So
anyway, so obviously that opening screen, just for we were referencing the Divas bottling earlier on, that is the Divas Chenin. And it is, I think, just a really unique expression of what we are. You don't need to read the things, you obviously can. I think one of the unique aspects of the Morgenzon, we're in Stellenbosch. All our vineyards sit between 200 and 300 meters. So we're getting a little bit of altitude. That does bring a cooling effect. But the bigger thing, and hopefully some of you guys will get to visit us one of these days when everything sort of returns to semi-normal. All our vineyards, it's like an amphitheater that looks back down, and this is right at the top. This is up where the owner's, Wendy's house is. The picture there is a view from her house, and below that falls away is this very steep amphitheater that forms the bowl, and the amphitheater, that is the Morgenzon, and it is all south and southeast facing. So in our part of the world, in the southern hemisphere, that's the cool slope. North-facing slopes are your warm slopes. And the mountain you see in the background is the Helderberg, which is another important sub-unit and ward of Stellenbosch. That also, off to the right of that picture, is False Bay. And as you can see, it's an open, flat run straight to us. And the first hill that the ocean breezes hit when they're coming off the ocean is the Morgenzon. It is our amphitheater. So in my travels around the world, there's no hard and fast rules when it comes to wine, but one of the ones that is a fairly constant rule is the warm sites in the cool areas. And I've got a map of the Mosel behind me, and I think that's a good example of that. The warm sites are the Grand Cru sites there in the cool region. Stellenbosch and most of South Africa is what you'd refer to as Mediterranean and relatively warm. It's not baking hot, but it's not cool by any stretch of the means. And within Stellenbosch, the best wines come from altitude or they come from south-facing slopes. And the Morgenzon has both of those. And I think that's where our focus in a large extent is Chenin and Chardonnay, our two white varieties that perform best, but a lot of white varieties. And then when we get to the reds, you'll see the structure of our reds is far more direct and linear than a lot of typical South African wines, but it's also owing to the relatively coolness of our site. These are our owners, Wendy and Hilton Applebaum. Wendy is a massively successful businesswoman in many, many aspects. And her and her husband now are huge philanthropists, and that takes up most of their time, is various philanthropic endeavors, as well as they're both very passionate about their little wine business, which is the Morgenzon. And they're very involved in every aspect of what we do here. Wonderful people to work for. Yeah. Wendy Applebaum, I mean, you can read all of those, but she's, Forbes Businesswoman of the Year. She is involved with various things all over the globe and is an absolute dynamo. And she puts that same level of energy and detail and passion into the wine business. And, the pursuit of quality and also expressing what South Africa and Stellenbosch can do. Her pursuit of that is just unwavering and unending. That's myself. Here you've got my ugly mug, so we don't need to carry too much of time on that. But I have been very fortunate enough to make wine all over the world. I was quite successful at a small winery here, but I also realized I needed to get a bit of a more global perspective of winemaking if I really wanted to get to where I wanted to get to in winemaking. So I packed up my bags and sort of cellar-ratted a little bit around the world. I worked in Washington State, California, New Zealand, obviously a few vintages in between in South Africa, between jobs sort of idea. And then in 2004, I ran into this chap called Chris Ringling in Spain. And I was working on another project. I was flying winemaker at a big bodega in the region of Gemilla. And Chris had his project at El Nido. It was the second or the third vintage of El Nido, his El Nido project in the south of Spain. And he and I hit it off like a house on fire. And I actually landed up helping and assisting with the winemaking. And pretty much, other than a 2-season hiatus when I was working on a project in California, ever since then, until I returned to South Africa, I worked, the best part of 6, nearly 7 years for Chris on various projects around the world. I was based in California for a large chunk of it, but also I was down in Australia making wine there. We are based in South Australia. We got fruit from all over, but most of the fruit that we worked with was South Australian fruit. Largely focused around Barossa and McLaren Vale. And then, I did his Californian winemaking projects for him. And then through Chris, or contact of Chris's that we both knew, I went and set up a new winery in Spain. So I was in Spain for 3 years. And then I decided to come home, bring my skills home. And I've been back in South Africa just going on 9 years now. So it's an awesome place to be, and I love the wines. And again, I'm really looking forward to sharing some of what we do. Hilton, a lot of people know we're known as the garden vineyards because we've got beautiful gardens. It's this amphitheater that sort of wraps around everything, but something a little bit quirky. Hilton is the established classic FM in South Africa, the only classic music station in South Africa. And we pipe classical music 24 hours a day to our vineyards. He believes it makes happier vineyards. It definitely makes for happier workers. I'm not going to lie, having that sort of quiet background music all day, we're a bit calmer for it. So if the vineyards aren't happy for it, it's got calmer workforce, and I think that's a good thing. I do want to know what they'd do if we played a bit of AC/DC to them, but I might lose my job if I did that.
Well, there's some blokes in New Zealand that I think are actually band members of AC/DC, and they make an amazing but frenetic Pinot Noir. I can't remember the name of the label right now, so there might be something to it.
Oh. In a few years' time, I'll give it a trial.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alistair, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I'm always wanting to ask a question. Where did this come from? Where did the idea of the music come from? Who was the inspiration?
Hilton is he's a real intellectual, and he was chatting to one of his colleagues, the Applebaums invest heavily at the Wits Medical School. It's actually called the Donald Gordon Medical School, and Donnie Gordon was Wendy's father and a titan of business in South Africa in the early days. And they were there, and I asked him how he got it. He said he's had a love of classical music his whole life, so he's been very into it. And one of these guys was doing research on the effect of music on plants, and his conclusion was if you've got the right music waves going towards the plants, you make the plants grow happier. I'm not going to lie, I don't know if I've quite seen it in the quality of the wines, but yeah, again, it keeps the owners happy and it keeps the workers calm. So maybe it does make better wine. It's just a more indirect way of making better wine.
It's fantastic.
Hey Rob,
Yeah.
Didn't we meet as a consequence of this? You've actually got some imitators. We met some other Safa nutter.
I'm doing my head in trying to think which one it is that does it.
Remember?
Well. Yeah. I'm wondering if it's not Catherine Marshall. I can't remember.
No, it wasn't Catherine Marshall. I would have remembered that. There was a guy, we imported him for a little while, then he moved on. I think he's probably locked up somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say he's in a padded cell somewhere.
Yeah. It's
but
not
the music.
I think the people who are into biodynamics will argue that wine will taste different on different days of the month, and a lot of that is to do with the gravity and the pull of the moon, and they will argue that wine will taste different even in the barrel according to when you're tasting it on any given time period. So I see no reason why melodics shouldn't make a difference on a molecular level somehow. I'm completely out of my field, but it's sort of, with all the crazy stuff one hears from the organics and the biodynamic people, I can't see any reason why not.
Listen, having beautiful music in the background all day is not a terrible thing. So,
if it keeps the viticulturist in a good mood, it's half the battle.
Exactly. So this is just a picture of our gardens. Obviously, both Hilton and Wendy are very keen, and specifically Hilton is really quite. And we try not to. It's not like a very structured English country garden. It's tried to be true to what we are. We've also got a patch of quite a sizable patch of Renosterveld, which is an endangered subsect of the what you call it.
The flora.
Fynbos, which is what we've got is unique to us in South Africa. And the Renosterveld, there's only 1% of the original surface area left in the world. And we've got a good 10, 15 hectare swath of it here. So we try and preserve that. And also with the gardens and the Renosterveld, they make great corridors. It's that sort of bio balances. We're not super organic or super biodynamic or anything like that, but we try and listen to our terroir and listen to our estate and be sort of integrate into the natural rhythms, and those corridors are quite important. Just a few more pictures around. I mean, it's just giving you an idea. This is a picture, the bottom right one at the top of the vineyards. It gives you an idea of how steep it is down, and then you can see a few buildings in the bottom of the picture. That's actually the winery. So it gives you an idea of the scale of the amphitheater down to the winery. More pictures, again, the terroir, I think we've talked a bit about it, but the bottom picture again is basically the reverse angle looking back up to the amphitheater. The divas, I think now we just run through all the bits and bobs.
At this point, how about we have a look at the first one, the white blend at this point, if that's okay.
Let me get to it so I can keep it up on the screen. Just to give you a bit of a background of awards. But at the end of the day, I'm probably the winemaker that's a marketer's worst nightmare. I don't worry about awards. I'm more worried about, is the person drinking the wine smiling? We can talk all day long about various bits and bobs and terroir. Wine is here to, and it's something I learned from Chris, is here to bring you pleasure. And I remember as a young winemaker tasting with Chris, I would be very critical and very analytical of wines. You know, we'd be out to dinner in Jumilla in Spain, not great wine lists, and quite often some quite adventurous sort of wines that we were drinking, you know, jug wines and the like. And yeah, this is now one of the top, if not the top winemaker in the world. And he is, yeah, we're tasting these pretty ordinary jug wines, and he was so complimentary about them always. And he just said, he turned around to me and he said, yeah, you're a typical young winemaker, you know, ripping wines apart, over analyzing them. Find something that you like about the wine. Stop finding things you don't like about the wine, and find something you like about the wine, because it's here to bring us pleasure. We're having a nice meal. This is the wine we've got. There is no plan B, so we may as well enjoy it. And so for me, yeah, great wine. I'm a wine geek, and I like looking at the nitty gritty of it. But at the end of the day, it's about making delicious wine. And you know, one of my best mates was here before I was, Carl van der Merwe, and he was the winemaker and cellar master here before myself. And so I've known these wines a long time.
So we're looking at 5 varieties, right, in this? So what's the main?
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of variety?
Yeah, we're looking at Roussanne, Marsanne, Grenache Blanc. Depending on the vintage, yeah, there may be a wallop of Chenin and or Chardonnay. And every now and again, there's also a little bit of Viognier.
Right.
The 2017, to tell you the honest truth, if I had to go and tell you exactly what it is, I get so confused between the vintages, I can't. I know the 17 was based around Roussanne.
Mm-hmm. I got it. Hold on. I can be useful for once. Hold on. This is my moment. Get out of the way, Alistair. All right. Now, what have we got here? We've got 25% Roussanne, 24% Chenin, 23 Grenache Blanc, 14 Chardonnay, and 14 Viognier. There you go.
Oh, so that's a fair whack of Viognier. That's quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, I think that's about as much as it ever was. Yeah. But 17 was one of the tightest, coolest vintages we've ever had. So, yeah, the Viognier might have brought its shoulders out. In many years, it becomes too dominant in the blend, but a cooler vintage might have made a tighter wine. Obviously, I didn't put this blend together, but this is truly one of my favorite wines in our portfolio. Purely because I love white wines out of the Rhone Valley. Yes, there's a lot of Rhone components in this, but it's more about the textural elements of these wines. Yeah, there's a beautiful, subtle, sweet sort of stone fruit running through the wine, sort of almost a nectarine kind of sweetness. But the texture is what I love. It's got this beautiful viscosity on the palate without being heavy. You know, a lot of New World wines fall into the trap of being very heavy, soupy, syrupy wines, and this has got that texture and that viscosity without being heavy.
Yeah,
and it's that mineral freshness. Yeah, and it's mineral freshness that a lot of New World wines don't have. And it's, yeah, these soils that are on our property are all decomposed granite. And when you get your viticulture right and you marry it with your winemaking, you let the terroir shine through without masking it with too much winemaking technique, you can get beautifully textured wines. And I think you'll see it in other wines we taste this evening. But really cracking texture, cracking sort of, you know, viscosity and vinosity, I suppose. I don't think that's a word even, but, you know, great length. And it's just a wonderful wine. And this wine really, we specifically, on all our wines, you'll see the vintages. There's no 2020s or 2020, or there is a 2020 on the DMZ side, but yeah, that's as young a wine as you'll see come out of the Morgenzon stable. We like our wines to mature. I like mature white wines. Another thing, drinking some old Semillons out of Australia, out of the Barossa, and obviously out of the Hunter Valley. Yeah, it really opened my eyes to texture in white wines. And so we, as a rule, like our white wines to be on the market when they are already got a few years under their belt, because we think that's when they really start showing their true colors. They can be a bit austere when they're young.
The sadness tonight is our timing, because we just last week sold out of the last of this wine. The 18 will be our next shipment. But yes, I agree with you. For those who drink a lot of Australian whites, I find a synergy texturally between this wine and what Rick Kinsbrunner does at Gioconda, with his Marsanne Roussanne. So you get this wonderful, nimble, silky component from the Marsanne Roussanne. It just defines the wine, and at a really decent price point. So at this point, maybe if we can look at the Chenin 20 and the Chenin Reserve 18 side by side, that would be very cool.
Yeah, let me find the Chenin Reserve. So the Chenin Reserve, I mean, I'm a complete Chenin freak. I've since I came back to South Africa, I've only worked at, well, this is my third property, my third stop, but I've only worked with places that I think can make great Chenin Blanc. I think obviously it's not a South African variety, but it is without a doubt something that we've claimed as our own. We've adopted Chenin as our national grape variety, and I think we make it in a pretty unique style. I think the Mediterranean expression of Chenin is brilliant. We've got a lot of it. We've got 53% of the world's Chenin Blanc vineyards planted in South Africa. It was primarily owing to the big bad days when we were isolated. We made a lot of brandy, and Chenin was a great variety because it maintains its natural acidity. So it was a great variety to use to make base wine for brandy distillation. And we're very happy for it because it meant it was planted everywhere, and it was quite often planted on some really ropey sites. But the best ones have remained. The Chenins planted on the best sites have remained. And a good colleague of mine, Brevet Raats, I think his Twitter handle's Chenin King. And he and I worked together literally at my first winemaking gig in South Africa, way, way back when. And he instilled this love of Chenin.
I think the really cool thing to point out on what the guys are tasting tonight is that we're tasting the 18, which this award from Decanter Wine Awards really is extraordinary. Best white wine of the entire show, as well as, of course, best Chenin Blanc in show. That is phenomenally, I mean, that's transcending every other white wine submitted into the competition globally. So it's a really important recognition. 95 points from Tim Aitken, and at 59, we've probably, by tasting this one ahead of tasting the estate, jar number 2, the 2020, which is in itself at a slightly lower price point at $32, in fact, a significantly lower price point, has achieved enormously successful results too, being in the top 10 best white wines from Wine Magazine in South Africa, which is no mean feat considering its price point. And for those who don't follow the South African wine media, that's probably the equivalent to Wine Magazine in Australia, or Decanter in the UK, or Spectator in the US. I'm sorry to hustle everybody on, but time's ticking against us.
But Rob, just on these two wines,
yeah.
I know you haven't got the privilege of trying them in front of you, but the number 2, perfectly good wine, and as Alistair said, there's not much you can find in there that you don't find that you would find a very pleasant wine. Yeah. But this reserve, seriously, it is sensational.
I'm with you, Lou. Sorry, Alistair, this is the best Chenin Blanc I've tasted, okay? I'm just throwing it out there, okay? I'm not, I don't have the background of the 2 other colleagues, Lou and Rob, on here, but this is unbelievable, okay?
This is why we're going to use Slido, boys.
Yeah, perfect.
But it is, though, Lou. It is just so, I mean, unbelievable.
No, it's a different level, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just a different level. It's sort of like going from your standard Margaret River Chardonnay to Lewin.
It's
just different level.
It's exactly that. The DMZ is just a very sort of naked, not a lot of, it's a bit of foudre ferments, tank fermented, foudre, concrete, maybe a few smaller, older neutral oak barrels. It's about getting texture and freshness and brightness, and it's a cracking glass of wine. But when you move to the reserve, it's from a single vineyard on the property. The vineyard, as I said, is turning 50 years old this year. or this coming vintage will be its 50th year. Planted in 1972, and there's just a density and a length and a great expression. And what I love about this, there's it's not quite slaty, but there's a mineral texture to it that's almost slaty, and that's granite. When you get granite right, that's the expression you get off it. And you might find a little bit on the Chardonnay, which is the next one we'll look at.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's the one aspect of your Chardonnay that rings true vintage on vintage, is that granite. There's a crunchiness to it, a minerality to it, especially when it's younger. That's really definitive and fantastic.
And I think, I can only encourage anyone out there is, I'm here to sell the Morgenzon wines, but get out there and try South African Chenin. They are not, at a reasonable, as long as it's from a reasonable producer, there aren't too many weak Chenins at the moment, because the guys have really clocked into finding the balance between that richness and the mineral elements. I think we erred to that very rich style, a lot of botrytis, a lot of oak, a lot of malolactic, and we've gassed all that back. We here are working with very, very little bits of malolactic to build a bit of texture and just cracking wines.
Yeah, we haven't had many bad ones recently, Alistair, out of South Africa, I've got to say. The Chenin Blanc, I think, to a large degree, has sort of led the renaissance of people back to South African wines, for us, at least, along our client base. So we also bring in wine from,
David and Nadia.
Robert, you better pronounce it, Delagraff. How do you say it? That one. Sounds like you're being choked. Anyway, we bring in Delagraff, and the other one, Robert, that
David and Nadia, we do their full range of Chenins. I was about to say, when you get to the top end with David and Nadia, the Scarly Club, and I can't remember the other one now, they're expensive Chenin. They're definitely, to my mind, the most expensive I've ever marketed. But that sort of porcelain-like components to the textures that seem to emerge at the top end are just profoundly good. And very specific to South Africa.
And the Catherine Marshall's quite popular as well.
Yeah, old Kathy. Well, she's a rock star. I'm Kathy.
Crazy for her. I think she's fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at that Chardonnay now. 96 points from Tomatekin. We're back in the 2018s. Gold medal from Decanter. And I think it was you, Alistair. No, it wasn't you. Maybe it was Chris, who wrote that he believed this was the finest, or one of the finest they've ever produced at the Morgan.
Yeah, 2018 was not a world-class vintage for South Africa. No, definitely not Stellenbosch.
Yeah,
but because of the uniqueness, I mean, I'll go as far as to say I think the Morgenzon is one of the, if not the most unique terroir subunit in Stellenbosch. And it's definitely right up there, if not the coolest subunit of terroir. And so it bucks the trend. So the 18 vintage, which was quite a warm, dry vintage, and some places battled. We almost got a little bit more density than we got that sort of density and the richness without too much effort. And so it bucks the trends of 18. And I remember chatting to Carl about it at the time. He said to me, he just said, these wines were the best he produced. And I said, Carl, man, you're on something. You've lost the plot here. 18s are pretty ordinary. They're very voluptuous, sexy wines, but they're gonna be around for the long haul. And you look at these wines, what's it? 4 years on the clock. And they're just really starting to hit their straps. And the Chardonnay is just, although it's 100% granite soils, you've got that beautiful chalky texture. It's that sort of pithy lemon rind sort of texture to it. And this wine's just going to crack on forever and ever, I think. And it's a real privilege to be able to sell it. We're about to move on. We're a few months away from moving on to the 19. And the 19 is also a cracking little wine, but this 18 is a real special glass of wine.
It's quite interesting because seldom do we see a comparison of performance on the screen, and everyone looks there. You can see 17 by far is seen as a more important vintage or more successful vintage for South Africa and Stellenbosch. Look at that ratings difference into a more difficult year. Clearly, this is about that mesoclimate that you've got. And also, I am obsessed with more complex years because it brings out the best in the winemaker. And clearly, that's what's happened here. So I'm sad to see we only got 3 dozen of this left. So I'd imagine when we reload, we'll be getting 19 from you.
No, if you reload smartly, you'll definitely get some 2018 from us.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's put the
move on.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll put the blue and the red side by side. Different styles. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, they are very different styles, and it's something. It's something we working on. I mean, the Maestro, just like the Maestro White, was. I like to call them our estate blends. They're an expression of all the varieties and all the vineyards on the property, expressed in a bottle of wine. So that's the Maestro White. And pretty much, depending on the year, it may have pretty much everything we grow from a varietal point of view in it. The reds, we obviously said, we predominantly focused on the Rhone varietals, Syrah being our anchor customer, but we've got quite significant portions of Grenache and a little bit of Mourvèdre. And this Maestro Blue is, and again, it's not necessarily a Rhone blend, but it's definitely our expression of the Rhone varietals on our property. And owing to the fact that we've got high sun intensity, relatively high UV in South Africa, but we're in a cooler site, it gives you a more linear expression of these varieties than maybe what you'll see most of from South Africa. And then we've got a small little corner of the property. It's actually across the entrance road. So it's sort of, we look at it from where we're at on the main part of the property. That's on a flatter part, but it's actually slightly northwest facing. So it's not a warm site by any stretch of the means, but it's a lot warmer than the rest of the property. We get a little bit of interesting Syrah off that adds a bit of softness and richness to our DMZ Syrah, but also in years that are cooler years, it's an important component in the reserve, but it is also the foundation stone of the Maestro. This is very confusing, but the Maestro red that's in the purple package.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. It's too late to start calling it Maestro purple.
Yeah, it's one of those things when I got here, I was like, what were you thinking? Anyway, I like to keep my job, so I didn't voice my opinion too loudly.
But maybe when the guys put them side by side, they'll hear or taste the echo of Rhone in the blue, as opposed to the more Bordeaux-esque structure of the red / purple.
Exactly. So the Maestro is based around our Bordeaux components. Yeah. It's usually a good lick of Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. They're all on the property, and they usually all, and we don't throw them all together just because we want to have all 5 there. They actually work off each other quite well.
I think your Verdot in the 16 was almost not there at all. It looks like very close to 40% each of Cab and Merlot, and then 13 of Cab Franc, and then some Malbec.
Yeah, Malbec, there you go. So again, it's what we think is the best expression. I actually said to Wendy, should we not just make one Maestro wine on the red side of things, and just put the best. But Cabernet and Syrah on this site can be, there are, well, obviously Australia popularized it. Cab and Shiraz, and the Grangers of the world have sort of cemented that relationship, and they can work very well together. So watch the space. Maybe we will retool this.
Well, that'll be very interesting, because I'm yet to taste the Cab Shiraz out of South Africa that seems to achieve that kind of unity of spirit that Australian Cab Shiraz does. Admittedly, not tasted many, but I've never really found one that's quite like a South Australian blend of those two varietals.
There's only one really that I think that seriously gets it right year in, year out. It would be the Ristenvrede estate.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, yes. And that's always got it's cab dominant, but it's always got a big whack of their Shiraz in it.
Yeah. But stylistically, Ristenvrede is very much old school in terms of how it's made, and that wine really needs 10 years on the clock before it starts to show, whereas the South Australian interpretations of that style are way more forward, or whatever.
Absolutely.
Winemaking or terroir or whatever, way different.
But I think what's important to note on this blue, it's showing that ripeness of fruit. There's a beautiful bramble sweet fruit, but there's definitely, you can see in the tannins, there's this powdery, dry tannin. There's almost like a pink peppercorn spiciness. I know people talk about white pepper and that, but there is definitely a grippy, savory edge to the wine without being overtly savory. There's a soft sweetness, and it's just a really cracking Rhone style. I think it's very South African. I don't think anyone would mistake this with a Rhone. It's definitely not that.
No, it's not, but it's very ripe. It's quite broad on the palate, really pleasant, flows over very easily, right? Whereas the red, the Cabernet blend is more austere and more linear to my way of thinking.
Absolutely. It is very austere by comparison. It's definitely more in the old school Bordeaux mold. It's got a lot of that Greek. I don't want to say green or herbaceous, but it's definitely got that
tomato leaf. It's a tomato leaf thing.
Tomato leaf. Even currant leaf. That sort of, it's got that sort of sweetness, but it's leafy. And there is a subtle sort of red cranberry sort of fruit coming through, and it matures beautifully. I mean, we're looking at the 2016 here, and it's still just ticking along beautifully. It's still really fresh as a daisy.
Really enjoyable. It's so different, right? Just so different. It's lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell Wendy not to agree with you. You must keep them separate. As siblings, it's great to have them as separate wines.
I'll pass your message, your sentiments on to it.
All right. Before we wrap up, are there any more questions from the group? I know that Lou has a question for you. That if there's anybody else,
someone else must have a question beforehand, or they'll be quiet.
There's been a fair bit of chatting through the tasting tonight, so possibly.
That's true. That's true. But Alistair, I have one question that I ask every winemaker when we have them on, and that is, when no one's looking and you don't care, what wines do you like drinking?
You can't see it behind me. This is a very old map. You can see the snaking line potentially. There's a bit of a glare on it. It's a map of the Moselle.
Okay.
Mosel. Chris Ringling was born in 1959, and he has arguably the world's best collection of 1959 wines from all over the planet. And he's quite generous. When you get to his house on Stone Chimney Creek for a Sunday lunch, you could be liable between the two of you to open up 20, 25 bottles of wine. You won't drink them all, but you'll drink them as probably over 2 or 3 days thereafter. Yeah. And quite often when he's feeling in a good mood, he'll dig into his 59s. And it was a good vintage for the Moselle, and he shared a number of great old Moselles, not just 59s, but a lot of them. And I honestly believe great Mosel Riesling is one of the most ageless wines I've ever come across. And when no one's looking and I'm on my deathbed, I'll crack out my best Moselle.
Okay.
Excellent.
So Rob, the fact is that all these winemakers, about 8 out of 10,
aromatic
will die on a Riesling. Right?
Yeah.
That's what they do. Again, Alistair doesn't make a Riesling, but he's happy to drink it on his deathbed. There you go.
But to be fair, I don't think the Yarkies have got the right land for Riesling. I don't think I've ever tasted a Riesling that
Does anyone make it there? Or?
Not that I can even think of.
No, there's a handful.
Okay.
Most of the reasonable examples are out of Elgin. There's one or two really good ones out there, but by and large, we should stick to other things. Riesling's not quite our game. I mean, that said, I mean, I wouldn't have guessed South Australia really making anything cracking, but the Clare and some sites in Eden, make cracking. It's one of my favorite wines. I drink on a fairly regular basis because I've obviously got access to Rockford, but Rockford make an Eden Valley Riesling, and I get a case shipped out every year. Oh, and it's just a cracking glass of wine, man.
Oh, Australian Riesling out of Clare is dirt cheap and fantastic. But if you ask your commercial managers, they'll hang you alive because they can't sell it.
Yeah.
Not a big enough market.
Thanks so much for joining us, Alistair. It's been fantastic to bright the tile and share some words that I haven't for quite a long time. And thanks everybody in Singapore for tonight. It's been a great tasting. And I look forward to catching up when the new vintages arrive for next year. Thanks,
absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Cool.
When are you back, Rob?
Mate, I think the middle of October, it's looking like. I've just arranged. It's all up to Singapore to say, yes, I need to allocate a space for me. But all systems go.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Fantastic, Alistair. Thank you very much.
No, it's only a pleasure. Thanks, guys. And, when we're all back to normal, come visit us this side of the world. It's not a bad neck of the woods.
Sounds like a great idea.
Great idea. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch up next week for Epirosa. Take it easy.
Oh, cool.
Sure.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.